switch gears now and talk a little bit about capital budget. And Mr. Spontak is going to answer some questions for us about that. So why exactly do we need capital dues, or why do we need a capital budget?
Sure. Normal maintenance is covered in our operating expenses, but normal maintenance would be things like having an HVAC contractor come in periodically to service the air conditioning units. It's a regular expense. You're not really extending the life of that asset. You're just trying to keep it in operating expenses. There are occasions where the useful life of something like an air handler, which we just replaced, does come to the end, and you've got to actually replace it, and you've got to have the funds to actually replace that. Those expenses, those funds are not part of the normal operating budget, so you need a capital budget to pay for that. A good example, too, that Bob just gave me a short while ago was, if you think of a mower, if a mower blows a tire, it's pretty easy to fix that, and that type of expense would probably be included within the operating budget. But if the mower completely broke down and you had to rebuild it or replace it, now you've got to come up with much more funds, and that's got to come from an operating budget. So that's why you need a separate pool of funds to pay for that.
Perfect. And this is something new for fiscal year 20, correct?
It is. We have not had that before. The bylaws, once again, specifically provide for that. In the bylaws, there is a calculation equal to 10% of the prior year's revenues that can be set aside for these capital needs, and that's exactly how the $1,800 per member has come up. We came up with that amount. It is exactly 10% of the prior year's revenues divided by the number of members.
So we should continue to see this year after year.
We will continue to see that year after year. And when you think about it, it makes sense that, again, I'll use the mower example because it's a simple one, but if you buy new mowers this year, you're not going to have those mowers forever. In fact, the average life of the mowers that we use, because they get used very hard, is 4 years. So every 4 years, we're going to be looking to replace those mowers. And the same can be said about a lot of the equipment we have here at the club.
Mr. Gilchrist mentioned reserves when we talked about the operating budget. Tell me a little bit about reserves on the capital side of it.
Very similar to the example that Bob gave, you have the exact same situation on the capital side as well. The $1,800 will pay for our anticipated capital needs, but there's always the potential for unanticipated capital needs. Again, there are things that insurance unfortunately do not cover. We have very good insurance policies. We bought down our deductibles. We think the membership is very well protected, but there's always things that aren't completely covered, and you've got to have the funds available to replace those.
Right. So, restrictions. Are there any restrictions on the capital reserve that members should know about?
There are, and in fact, that's a great point. There is a big difference between the $1,800 that each member is going to be asked to pay and the normal dues, and the difference is sales tax. Under Florida state law, dues are subject to sales tax, and much as we've paid those in the past, we will have to continue to pay Florida sales tax on dues. However, any amounts that are received from the members that are going to be used for capital expenditures are not subject to sales tax. And that's one of the benefits of having separate fees charged to the members. We can save everybody a little bit of sales tax. Now, the one problem with that is that money cannot be used then for operating expenses, because under the sales tax law, since you have not paid sales tax for it, it can only be used for capital items. So there are some restrictions around their use.
And we'll round up that discussion with the capital reserve study. So if you can tell me a little bit about the importance of that.
Sure. There were two key components of the capital reserve study. We hired a third-party firm, Club Benchmarking, to do this for us. The first was we needed to understand what we owned. We got the club, but there was not a detailed listing of all the assets that we had, and Club Benchmarking went through and actually counted every chair, every every picture, every lawnmower, every piece of equipment we had in the entire club and made a list. So they then established what the current value of that was, and it allowed us to book those assets on our accounting books and then start depreciating them from that point forward. But there was a second very key component to that study as well. They also estimated the useful life of every one of these assets. So again, I hate to keep going back to my same example, but going back to the mower example, we owned a lot of mowers, and we do own a lot of mowers. Some of them were newer, some of them were older. We needed to understand when we could anticipate needing to replace these mowers, and in fact, part of the club benchmarking study was an estimate of the remaining useful lives of each of these, and that's where we've come up with our annual anticipated spend for these capital repair and replacement directly off that study.
Excellent. Very good for future information that's needed as we
Yes.
build future budgets.